Hello.
Hey, what's going on everyone? We're here with another video. This is going to be a very fun video. Actually somewhat of a co-sponsored video, if you will. Local company, Tune Up Guitars here in Boise. We will include a link to their store down there. They have been getting these very cool Larrivee guitars in. These T-style guitars. This is a Burgundy Mist Swamp Ash. Very cool. We'll show some shots flying around the guitar just to show you what it looks like. We've got this in because we're going to do a modification project, and this is kind of brought to you by the Tune Up Guitars guys. Nick over there at Tune Up Guitars will help you out if you're looking for one of these guitars, but we're going to modify this guitar. It's going to get the 9T set. We're going to try to beef it up, give it a little bit more thickness, a little bit more life. It's a really lightweight guitar. I believe it's Swamp Ash. It's not 7 pounds. It's somewhere between 6 and 7. We haven't actually weighed it, but it's very light. Really comfortable, really nice stainless steel frets, really well built, I believe in California. So fantastic guitar, but we're gonna give it a little bit of a modification. You'll be able to get these guitars modified through Tune Up Guitars with our pickups in the future. So that's kind of the teaser on the plan. Marco, what do you think of this guitar just as an instrument, just kind of as you got to spend a little time with it? I know I kind of kept it for a while, so you're jumping back into kind of touching and feeling it, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, and I was really impressed on first impression. I mean, this thing is eye-catching, yep. And you pick up the neck, and it's really comfortable. It's really not designed to get in your way. It's super easy to get around on, and the contours are nice. We were talking about the contours this morning. Mm-hmm. How a little bit of contour goes a long way, even though it's not traditional tele, so to speak. So. Yeah, and there's just a lot of cool features on this guitar, and yeah, like the truss rod adjustment down here. And
I do like that a lot.
It's like a super modern telly, and it's super elegant, and yeah, we're gonna make it sound even better.
Yeah, we're gonna drop some 9Ts again there. We're trying to kind of come up with a matching. So I think we went with a nickel cover on the 9T with the open neck. Didn't mention this has a bone nut as well. Mm-hmm. Set up very, very, very nice. I think you can get these for around $1,700 to $1,900 range, which I feel like is a pretty good value. I think this thing is a couple notches above a lot of higher end Fenders that we've tried, and it just seems to be really well built. So we're going to take a look under the hood, and we're going to get these 9T pickups in here. This is kind of part one of this video series. We're going to show you how these sound at the very end of the video, and we're also going to have a second video that's a little more focused on the set in the guitar, a little bit longer form with the playing. So quick tone samples at the end, but for now we're going to show you how we're going to put these pickups in. Let's go to the bench.
Yeah, let's do it. And it looks like it's easy to see which is which.
Like a little paper and oil cap there at the end. Soldering looks very clean. Very nice. So we'll get the strings off and start getting the old pickups out. Alright, one thing we noticed on this guitar, it has a couple screws at the front of the bridge plate there for the bridge and the bridge pickup. And there's a couple small screws there that pretty interesting. So Marco was talking about it as we were pulling everything off, and looks like, what do you think, Marco? Kind of like addressing some of those common issues with with tele bridges.
Yeah, this looks like like some sort of original bridge too. It's also got like a scooped side, you know, like a dropped side there, so you can even hit the string a little bit better. But normally these sides have a tendency to lift up, so they kind of are addressing that issue on their end with some nice little screws right there.
Yeah, and even as you took the screws off, it does have a little movement to it, but they knock that down, which is kind of cool to see an innovation on a design that's been around for a long time.
Yeah, cool stuff. All right, so with tele installs, usually one has to take off the whole bridge, so now we're getting into that. So we're just kind of moving the saddles and making sure we can get the screws out. So, and then when you do tele installs, do you have a favorite order that you like to do everything? Do you like to pull everything off first? Do you, what's kind of your favorite method? You know, I'd like to say that there's an order. I just kind of start with one and go with the other. I don't, usually when I'm putting them back on, I do the thing where I set them all in part way and then I kind of sink them all down at the end. But taking them off is usually kind of just getting them off of there. But really, it's more about making sure you can get the saddles out without damaging them too, or getting them around the saddles without damaging them. Some bridges have these screws underneath the saddles, so you have to take them out.
Take the saddles off as well. That's one thing that is maybe a little more annoying about Telecaster installs. I do like the neck pickup here. I'll zoom out a little bit. I do like how the neck pickup is a pickguard mount pickup. I prefer that. I know some people don't like the look of having the extra screws there. I prefer it for easier adjustability and less likelihood of, if you're screwing into the wood, sometimes those screws can strip out and they're kind of hidden underneath the pickguard. But I do like the more neck adjustable, on the pickguard kind of thing, because then you can just take that and change it without taking the pickguard off. So it's like, that's one part of the Tele that's a little easier on this one, and then one is difficult as always with the bridge pickups. All right, so from here, what's next? Just getting a couple more screws out on the bridge.
Just getting a couple more screws out. I was gonna try and use this, but these are pretty big.
Pretty big screws. And again, like if you watched our last Jazzmaster video, you want to make sure you're finding the best suited screwdriver for the size of the screw. So even if that means you're using 4 different screwdrivers we got the little fat guy there that is perfectly sized for neck plate screws, bridge mounting screws, that kind of stuff. It just again ensures that you're not stripping out that screw, and you can get it nice and tight, which is also very important. So we'll get the bridge off, we'll get everything kind of loosened up, and then we will unsolder the wires for the existing pickups and get ready to put the new ones in. Alright, so loosening up the bridge screws a little bit. We're going to take a little peek under there, trying to drop that bridge down so then we can just take the plate off. It's a good idea in general to get a lot of the different elements out of the way when you're working on these guitars, just so you're not dropping it on the finish or anything like that. As you can see, we have some paper towels kind of hanging out. Have a good place to put everything, and that will work out a lot better. So Marco's taking out the actual bridge mounting screws, and it looks like we got some springs underneath there.
Yes, we do.
So I will take the camera off the tripod here and just get over.
They're like threaded through. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, burgundy mist. There's the color stamp, really nice clean cavity. You can see where the bridge wires are going back into the cavity there. There's a look at the existing bridge pickup, and everything looks pretty easily accessible. So looking underneath the bridge plate, looks like a really nice quality bridge and really high quality metal. A lot of times on these they're relying on the screws to ground the metal of the bridge, so it's grounding through here into the base plate. So what we're probably going to have to do is add a ground wire with the 9Ts, because the 9T bridge doesn't have a metal base plate on it. So we might experience some extra noise from that, but we can run a ground over here to touch to this metal, and then back to the back of the volume pot to complete that grounding that's happening in here. Usually they're using like a steel screw that's conductive here, and then that touches the rest of the metal. So it's kind of the quick method of grounding your metal and your strings.
Alright, so it looks to me, on just gently tugging this bridge pickup, we can see that it's these 2 wires. So I'm just going to start with grabbing those first. And always it's a good idea to take a picture of the cavity or the routes, especially if you're doing something really heavy modification. That way you can really know where you moved everything from. And this one, since there is a lot of solder right there, and if I heat all of that up, I might overheat the pot, so I might just clip this one.
So sometimes you notice on some pots, and this is a much cleaner wiring than many stock guitars, so under the hood definitely fully approve of the wiring job. But you're right, sometimes there is a big giant mountain of solder, and that is a good tip to make sure you're not burning it.
Yeah, because you can always go through and pull out that little tab later and make sure that it's super clean.
Yeah, and so the other black wire there is probably the neck pickup coming in. You can see on the pot in the middle of the screen, that's going to be your ground from the neck, and then you can see up to the left there, that's probably the hot from the neck pickup. So at this point, probably taking both of those out, both pickups out, making sure they're unhooked. You might find on some Fender style guitars, they do some weird body grounds too. They run, they'll run something to the bottom of each pickup cavity, and so you may find there's a whole bunch of wires coming in to your average pot, but in this case it's a lot more clean and streamlined. So once we got those pickups out, we'll basically from there we just need to unscrew the neck pickup from the pickguard, and we should be able to pull it right out.
Yeah.
Alright, pickguard's coming off. You can see the little access hole. It looks like very much more of a mini humbucker shaped route, maybe not quite as big as your average mini humbucker, but you can see the end of the truss rod wheel there. Definitely been enjoying the heel adjust wheel truss rod. You're seeing it more and more on guitars. I prefer it almost versus headstock adjust. I always feel like there's a bunch of scratch marks and stuff around your headstock, and this is a nice stainless steel wheel that you can just put a rod down in and make your fine-tuned adjustments. I really appreciate the people that make the effort to have access to the truss rod as well, because again, on a lot of guitars you have to take the pickguard off to adjust it, but this one you can adjust under tension with the strings on and actually see those results right away. So we've got the pickup coming out of the pickguard. Now we will get ready to put the 9Ts in there, and we'll talk a little bit about that bridge ground that we mentioned before. Alright, back over at the bridge pickup cavity we mentioned on the 9Ts. I'll grab the 9T here, put it up to the camera. You can see there is no base plate on there, so we don't have the advantage of having the metal ground through the bridge itself into the pickup, then into the wiring. So we're going to have to add an extra wire. A lot of times people will take like a cloth, some extra length of one of these cloth wires, run that under the bridge, but we're going to use the Gatekeeper shield tape in this case. We're going to give this a shot, see how this works for grounding. This is all conductive. The other benefit of this is we can keep it flat, so that way it will stick to this area underneath the bridge. We can keep it flat, run it into the cavity, and then we can actually solder to the back of it as well, and then run that solder joint to the ground, so that effectively will ground our bridge without worrying about the pickup. The Gatekeeper shield tape is available on our site. Really good for all these kinds of mods, even if you want to use it in the cavities. But for now, we're going to try it for the grounding method. If you don't do this, you'll get a lot of buzz, you'll get a lot of static with your strings, and when you touch the strings, it will effectively accomplish that grounding, and it'll be just a lot more noisy. So we're going to use the shield tape to take care of that. I'm just going to take a little piece off there. Doesn't even really have to be a special length. All I want to do is make sure that I'm coming underneath the metal of the bridge. If I really want to go super far, I could kind of run it over one of these screw holes, and then we could screw down through that. It's not going to go anywhere once it actually sticks to the guitar, but this is kind of a non-invasive sort of thing. We can do this without really like leaving a groove or anything like that. Sometimes we'll even go, if we're using the wire method, we'll even go and drill a hole down through here. But this kind of saves a little bit of the space. And I'm going to run it right over one of those mounting screws and try to avoid where the strings are coming through, obviously. Run that down into the cavity, and I'll come around with the camera and get a shot of that. Here's a look at the other side. We've got the Gatekeeper shield tape. This is a 3/4 inch shield tape. We have a 1/4 inch that you can also do that with. I prefer more contact than less, and then we'll clean up that area just around there. We can kind of peel it back right there. So we'll make a solder joint here and then run a separate ground wire all the way up into the back of the volume pot as well. And one thing to mention too is we looked at the bottom of this bridge, and you can see it's very, very scratched. It's very marked up. If you want to make sure that if your bridge is plated, that you make a scratched area that can have true metal to metal conductivity. If it's chrome plated, you're not going to get conductivity between the bridge and then through this whole section here. And we'll use a multimeter after we put this bridge down. Before we really screw it down, we'll make sure that we have a solid connection with the multimeter, and we'll show you how that works. Alright, coming in from the other side here, Going to just put a little solder joint down here. Try to kind of stay away from where the screws are going to be. The nice thing about this shield tape is you can solder straight to it. So we've got that solder joint there. And then we'll add another wire. We'll probably cut it off the excess from the other pieces, but we might have a long enough section. You want to make sure that you have, I really like this pushback wire. Going from here to the pot, it looks like we're going to be really close. So you don't have to trim it to length, but you want the wiring to look pretty clean. So we'll solder a piece of wire to that, run it back through the cavity, and solder it at the end when we have all the pickups ready to put in. All right, so now we're double teaming the guitar. We've got Marco trying to feed the wires in from the 9T into the pickguard. A lot of times you'll see these different cavities. They are a bit challenging to move the wires through from time to time, and I'll pull this camera back so people can kind of see what's happening. But typically, if you're going to have a wood mount, you're going to want to mount your pickup first to the neck cavity area. Then you're going to want to put the pickguard on at the end. But in this case, we have the 9T freshly installed. I guess you can show that.
The underside.
Yeah. So 9T is all installed. If you need to trim these screws, if your cavity is too small, you can trim the wood mount screws that come with the 9T, but in this case we're not going to need to do that. And then I will go ahead and run the wire through here. So I like to use the same color. If we're going to ground it, I like to use a black wire. You don't have to. And then I'm going to try to make this a fairly quick route. I don't want a lot of extra wire hanging out in there. So I'm going to just make sure I've got some solder on it. Soldering to our existing joint down there, and then we should have conductivity all the way to the pot. And once we install that wire, then again we'll go back with the multimeter and test. So you can already see the 9T is going to look pretty sweet in there. Nice open top cover with the humbucker style screws. And this can be done in either order. I know we were talking about it before, Marco, right? We can kind of put things down in either or order because we don't have to really worry about it. One thing to watch out for, obviously, is we have very sharp screws on here, so you can see Marco's kind of making sure that he's got it
where we need
straight down. And as long as it looks like it's holding, we're good.
Another thing, I also just marked my neck pickup leads so I can differentiate them from the bridge pickup leads when we get to soldering.
Definitely. So what we'll probably want to do is just make sure we have good conductivity between these points. So we can go ahead and solder the ground wire that we did here. We'll go ahead and solder it to the pot and place the bridge down and make sure we have a full connection between the metal to the actual ground circuit of the guitar. So do that first before we actually install the pickup. That way if we run into anything weird, we know that's something we can deal with later.
All right, and so now I'm just going to solder to that back of the volume pot where everything else is grounded. Should be pretty straightforward. And then I'll just sturdy this up a bit.
So if you're installing another type of pickup, any of our other pickups have a metal base plate. So you'll just want to use the same screws that came with it. Our screws that come with our pickups are stainless steel, so they're non-conductive. So you will want to use the stock screws if you're installing our pickups, and they have that method where there's no ground wire, because you may run into that issue from time to time.
Okay, so we got it grounded on there.
So now we will drop the plate back on. Really just trying to make sure we have contact there. And we will see what happens. So we've got the multimeter here set to 20K. It doesn't really matter. 20K is typically what we set it to for our pickups testing. And then I can run it from here, any point on the bridge. And as long as I get 0, hopefully you can see that in the camera. As long as I can get in 0, then I know I have conductivity. So the metal now is making a full contact to the pot. And we know that that method worked to use the shield tape, so we should be good to go. Sort of hot rodding the new ground system. Now we can get that 9T bridge pickup in there and get this thing playing soon. All right, one thing we mentioned too is our pickups come with like the spring tubing, and I do like the surgical tubing a little bit better than springs in most cases. So we're gonna sub out that as well. So what Marco's doing here is just trying to get access to the cavity. There's a lot of things happening at once. As you can see, we got lots of paper towels and all these pieces and parts of the guitars are getting pulled off and put back down. And so just make sure that you're always keeping that in mind. And it's nice to have a good workbench as well. We do thankfully have a good workbench. You can convince your spouse to use the kitchen table as long as you clean up after yourself. is a good idea. But Marco's going to fit these through the cavity. Thankfully on this guitar, we were just talking about that, is that there is enough room to fit the 2 wires and then the extra ground wire that we added. So sometimes there's not, and sometimes you may even have to enlarge the hole or use smaller wires. In this case, we are good. So we're kind of loosely getting the pickup in place here. We're going to add the screws through the bridge, and the one thing I do like about the surgical tubes is they hold the screws in place in the bridge. So Marco will put the screw in there, put the surgical tube on the other side of it, and it will stay in place as you try to guide in the new pickup. Sometimes you feel like you need an extra hand all the time when you're doing these type of things, but in general, do you have a tip on how to get that bridge in there correctly? Do you kind of do a little bit on each screw, or what's kind of your method?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of get them all started, and then I'll make sure that I can still see the hole and make sure that it's just oriented properly. You know, you can make sure that the space of the bridge, like around the bridge and the little hole, is kind of equidistant around all sides, you know, before you really fully tack it all down.
Makes sense.
Really super easy for things to get like wiggled out of place, and it just feels slightly off.
Yeah, and as you're positioning that bridge pickup, just be mindful of the coil wires as well. We've had some customers kind of sever those coil wires as they're lining up that bridge pickup, and you got your start and your finish wires coming right out in the middle there. So try to keep everything square. You know, keep it straight, lined up, everything kind of flat,
straight up from the top.
So the trickiest part is kind of holding it in position. The screws will kind of pseudo sink down into those holes, and then you can start to get a thread going. On the 9T specifically, we just have a laser cut hole that's a little smaller than the screw, so you're actually going to be threading into the fiberboard. So there's not a thread on a metal base plate.
So get one started.
So at this point, we're not really concerned about the height of the pickup. We're concerned about getting it in there and somewhat above the metal part of the cavity as well. And we'll do kind of the final setup once everything has strings back on it and we know it's working. So kind of repeat that process, and you can see Marco's working kind of around the circle, if you will, kind of the 3 different screws. And don't over tighten one. Don't make the pickup slant too much. You want to make sure your screws are straight through the fiberboard there on the 9T specifically. So once we get that in place, then we will solder in the bridge pickup and the neck pickup at the same time.
So right now all I'm doing is I've got the pickups loaded in there, but I didn't have the pickguard pinned down, and I just want to make sure that everything is oriented in relation to itself, so it doesn't look all wonky or anything like that.
And I think too, now that we mentioned this, any kind of little tin, you can use our pickup tins, which are very handy for the screws. You can also see in the background there, up over there, we have a magnetic holder, which is also very nice for screws, because the worst thing in the world is losing the screws for the job that you are trying to complete and want to play your newly awesome sounding guitar, and then you can't find one of the screws that you need to hold it down. So keeping track of those is above important, and make sure you have a good system to keep track of those. So really this is about kind of locating everything. Thankfully we have all the existing holes, but a lot of times you'll see, especially on teles, like they've somewhat forced the pick guard into place. At least I found on a few of them. This one's all nice and clean and very well done, but you may have to kind of like really finagle all of that stuff. So that's kind of what we're doing here, is really just putting everything back down, the screws for the pickguard, the screws for the bridge.
Okay, so now I'm to the point where I'm just putting these back in, and I have a silly little trick I like to do here. So it looks like when I'm starting, I'm doing it backwards, and I know that I'm just wanting to kind of find that thread, and you'll feel it kind of jump, and then that way you're not cross-threading or stripping out your threads here, and it makes it nice and easy to use the existing thread that's already in there. So that just saves you further headaches from, having to plug these holes and re-drill them. So we can see that again here. Going backwards. And you'll feel that kind of like bounce back into that little thread. So it's a neat little trick to save you some headaches.
Yeah, if you have one of those 6-saddle, thankfully with the barrel style bridges, we have a little bit of room to kind of sneak those screws back in. If you have one of the 6-saddle ones, you're gonna have to take all of those off. So again, keeping track of your screws and your springs and your saddles here. Always a good idea to label the saddles as well. A little piece of tape. You can say this is the E string, the A string, the D string. When you put those back in, there's nothing worse than putting them back in the wrong spots. And even the springs and screws sometimes are trimmed and lengthed according to how the guitar needs to be set up and intonated. So keep that in mind if you have to take off those pieces. Just another learn from our mistakes kind of thing. Just as you work on your Telecaster, there's some things you can actually avoid yourself more pain if you take a couple steps and be a little more organized. I'm speaking to myself in in this
too.
So we'll get the rest of that knocked down. Again, we didn't really worry about the height of the 9T. We're just going to kind of set it in there like it is. But you can already see it's looking pretty cool in there. Really taking the look of this guitar up another notch with these pickups in there. They're definitely known for their sound with the pseudo P90 design. They're gonna warm up this guitar. They're gonna fatten it up and kind of give it just a little bit more push, and then you can see how nice they're looking in there.
Okay, so now we've got both sets of wires. It's pretty easy to tell on this guitar, even though we marked our neck pickup lead. So these are the neck, and this is the bridge, and these whites are the ones that are going to go to the switch. Our bridge was going right here, and our neck was going right up here, but of course refer to your picture of your diagram or whatever you took, and you'll be all good to go. So I'm just going to get those in first. Okay, I got both of the hot leads soldered on to the switch. Now it's just getting both of these grounds on the same spot. And we'll just go back there where everything else is grounded so we can leave the rest of this stuff looking all nice and neat.
That's not a bad idea to make the wiring as clean as possible. Some people like to do the selector switch at the bottom, and kind of do all that weird stuff. It just depends on what's comfortable for them. So if you plan on doing that, you can leave the wires long, or if you think you might want to change to that in the future, you can leave them long. But if you know you're going to stay with the switch up top, then you can obviously just keep everything as is.
Yeah.
So you're saving some time here. Marco's twisting the wires together, getting them ready to solder at once, as opposed to making 10 solder joints. I've seen a lot of volume pots with a bunch of little solder lakes all over them. So you want to kind of think about that in terms of keeping everything clean, and like Marco mentioned before, is not keeping a lot of heat on that volume pot as well. You want to be able to get kind of in and out, make sure you have a good clean solder joint. So you want to pre-tin the wires like he's done in the past on videos, and then getting everything to be a nice contact here.
But you do want to be careful not to over twist these and sever one of your wires, because then you might not be grounding your pickup properly and you'll be getting some interference. So it's all the little details. But if we can do it, you can do it.
Definitely. That's a good point too, is just encouraging people to try. You really can't mess it up too bad. I mean, I guess you can, but at the same time, they're on a Telecaster. It's really just a couple solder joints, and you're in business. So we encourage people to try it. To feel free to go for it when you're doing something like this.
And now, this is just the final ground. This can get a little bit hot. We'll see how it goes.
It's a good idea to have tweezers. As you see, Marco's got tweezers to keep from your hand burning as you're trying to hold down those wires.
Yeah.
Really fine tweezers allow you to move the wires where you need to. And a lot of times, like in this case, you'll see he's using the tweezers just as like a hold down. So as it heats up, he's holding that in place to make sure that solder joint is solid and where we want it.
Just needs a little bit more solder. And then this is how you get them to not go flying all over the place. See, we've got a good connection.
All right, pickups are in. So what we like to do at this point is roughly kind of put everything back into place, and then we're going to do a tap test through the amp to make sure that our wiring job is good. Always do the tap test before you go back and string the guitar up. Save yourself a lot of headache if you run into something that is a surprise. So you just want to tuck the wires in a way that makes sense to go back in there. Make sure nothing's crossing, nothing's, no other ground wires are exposed, hitting the switch area as well. So we got everything tacked down, and you can even just put one screw in the bridge if you want, just so if you got to pull it back off, you're saving yourself some time. So we'll run over to the amp, do the quick tap test, make sure these are good to go. But you can see everything is just about in the final stages. So there were some sweet tones of this Larrivee guitar with the 9T pickups in it. We're going to have a link to the Tune Up Guitars website. You can order a Larrivee guitar, and we will probably be the ones installing the 9Ts. If you like the look and the feel of this, we can definitely get this ordered through the Tune Up Guitars guys. Really great. Love the sound of it. Feel free to leave some comments below. What do you think of this guitar? What do you think of the look? If you have questions about the guitar, we've spent a few weeks jamming out on it, but this is the Larrivee guitar, and then we'll be back with a second video probably in a week or so with a little bit more of full in-depth of tone sampling of this guitar. So thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our videos, and we appreciate all your support.